welcome to the latest episode of the Fine City Music Podcast. I'm your genial host, Paul Levens, ably assisted by my audio engineer, Stefan Malzak. Today we're talking to an academic and an author, a Norwich native and resident. He's Professor of Modern History at the University of Reading and known for his work on the 20th century British communism and fascism and punk and post-punk subculture and popular music. And also he's a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society, founder and co-editor of the journal 20th Century Communism. His books on punk and post-punk include No Future, Politics, Punk and Society, Xerox Machine, Punk, Post-Punk and Fanzines in Britain 1976 to 88. Some of his other books, Oswald Mosley and the New Party, Labour Inside the Gate, A History of the British Labour Party Between the Wars, Class Against Class, the Communist Party in Britain Between the Wars. For my part, I was a teenage punk myself in the late 1970s and saw many of the great punk bands like The Clash and the Ramones and the Damned, starting with Stiff Little Fingers at the Manchester Apollo in 1979. And being a politics and sociology graduate and a lapsed Marxist myself, I could quite happily talk communism and fascism with him for the next hour. But we'll try to stick to the music mostly, although as you'll probably appreciate, it's impossible to discuss punk without discussing politics and society. So today I'm talking to Matthew Worley. Welcome.
Thanks for asking me on.
Yeah, no, it's... I was going to start just with a bit of biography before we get into like the big questions of punk. Mm-hmm. You were born and grew up in Norwich.
Yeah.
Heartsease.
Yeah, I went to Heartsease, yeah. I lived at the top of Ketts Hill,
Right.
Britannia Road, but I went to school at Heartsease.
Right.
And went to their sixth form and then went to Nottingham University.
Yeah. It's always amused me, the name Heartsease. I've wondered, does it have a lower incidence of heart disease than anywhere else in the country, as it implies?
Probably not.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Is it a particularly...
I think it took a few years off my life.
Yeah. What sort of music were you listening to growing up, and how did you kind of get interested in punk and post-punk?
Well, my kind of moment that kind of turned my world upside down in that kind of pop epiphany way was seeing Adam and the Ants do Dog Eat Dog on Top of the Pops in October 1980. It was the first time they'd ever appeared on Top of the Pops.
Was that when they turned themselves into that sort of feathered...
Yeah, he'd become the kind of the pirate kind of buccaneer kind of thing, and they were on there, and he was dressed like that with the white stripe, and Marco looked brilliant on the drums, and Kevin Mooney looked great on the Mark on the guitar rather, and the two drummers, and then Kevin Mooney on the bass. And I was just my little. I was 9, about to be 10. It was my birthday about 2 weeks later, and my head was just swimming with it, and I just thought it was fantastic. Yeah. And I guess it was the kind of. I went to school next day. My friend Chris was into it as well, and we just became like Ant fans immediately. But I think the kind of historian in me at the time, or the proto-historian, was it wasn't enough just to go, I like that. I was like, well, who's Adam Ant, and where does he come from, and what's he singing about that for, and what does that mean? And so I did that thing that pop music's great for. It opened a little portal for me, and I followed it down. So it's through Adam Ant, and you only had to read like one thing, and you'd hear about Sex Pistols, and you'd hear about McLaren and Westwood, you'd hear about Jordan, and you'd hear about punk. And so, just as I was turning into being 10, I just was entered this world, and I became fascinated by it. So, by the time I was 10, 11, 12, I was just trying to go into the second-hand shops in Norwich and buying any 50p single by a punk band I'd heard.
Yeah. Were there a lot of those in Norwich?
Yeah, there were quite a few, and you could go. There was one on the market, there was one up Magdalen Street, and there was a couple at the back of Robbins Records, I think, or next to it. I did second-hand stuff, and I just got my pocket money and bought a single a week. And started buying the music press and just absorbing all this stuff about punk. And at the time, my tastes were I really wanted to know all about the Pistols and the Clash and the Buzzcocks and all the early stuff. But I also was then interested by things like Crass and some of the kind of early 80s bands. And then over time began to broaden out. And so by the time I was in my mid-teens and the mid-80s, I was getting into things like Joy Division and all that kind of world as well. So it's Adam and the Ants was my way in, and from I've always had a soft spot for him ever since, because he opened up this world.
Right. Yeah. Because I had a mate at the time who he started dressing in that kind of style, sort of thing. You've also just reminded me of my one and only ever instance of shoplifting.
Mm-hmm.
I had an O-level maths exam,
Mm-hmm.
and my mum gave me some money to buy a new battery for my calculator.
Yeah.
But there was a new Blondie single out that day. So I spent the money on the Blondie single and shoplifted a battery from Woolworths.
as it should be.
Yeah, and sweated so much walking up the road. I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah, too stressful a career.
Yeah, and I think the statute of limitations means I can admit to that now, doesn't it? So having kind of come interested in music, at what point did you become interested in politics and history? And
Yeah.
because they aren't, or to my mind, and as we'll discuss, you can't separate music from politics and society.
No, absolutely. And they kind of getting into punk. I mean, the thing with punk was it always made claims to be relevant and about what's going on. It was engaged. And so it doesn't take long before I start listening to these records. You listen to Anarchy in the UK. So, what's Anarchy? What's that all about? So I'd find out what Anarchy meant, and then you listen to a Clash song. Spanish bombs, what's the Spanish Civil War? So you listen to, the Falklands. I remember the Falklands War happening. I was 11, but it was a thing. And Crass released "How Does It Feel?" And I'm like, okay, so they're against the war. How does that work? And the music press was full of the politics of the bands, and so you kind of absorbed it as you went. And heading into the mid 1980s, the miners' strike and all that, it was very hard to disentangle pop and politics, and if you wanted to, you could do. You don't have to. But for me, it piqued my imagination, and I became interested in it. And again, so I started reading about the things that the bands were talking about, or the people the bands name dropped, or the subjects the bands sung about. And again, it's why I became an academic, isn't it? These things interest me, so I follow the leads. Yeah, I don't think I wrote it down. There was a quote in No Future about many a Clash fan becoming a socialist, me included. I thought that was a well-worn kind of route to. Yeah. But I mean, again, like you were saying about Adam the Ants, the Clash to me, opened up all sorts of stuff, and I started listening to a lot of reggae as a result of the Clash, for example. Yeah, absolutely. But also, I mean, they covered Mose Allison, for example, which again, I went off and bought a Mose Allison record. Yeah. I mean, because Two Tone happened around the same time I was getting to Adam Ants, and I liked the specials and all that. Yeah, and them doing cover versions of early ska songs. Yeah, that was my introduction into that world as well. So it was about following the leads. I was never one just to go, I like that song. Yeah, and leave it there. I was always like, what's that about? What's doing? Later on, with the Smiths, for example, with the iconography that they used on their early album record covers and stuff. It was always like, well, that's a film by Jean Cocteau. What's that? And that's Terence Stamp. What was he? Yeah. And you just go and follow the leads. I've always been a bit like that. Oh, but when you'd gone off to university, were you consciously thinking, I want to study politics and music? No, not really. I kind of went off to university in a kind of, I didn't know what I wanted to do, really. I knew I liked thinking about stuff. So I wanted to carry on doing that, and I didn't know a job I wanted to do. So I went to university, and I did history because I've always liked history in a very general sense. Then when I was at university, I had a pretty rubbish first year. I didn't really know what I was doing. And then second year and third year, I kind of clicked into it and did all right. And while I was there, I started, the university library opened everything up, because instead of getting the books out I was meant to be reading about the Stuarts or something like that, I'd be getting the anthology of situationist writings that was in there, which were books I'd heard of but hadn't been able to find in Norwich at that point. Yeah, like Ken Nabb's anthology, and I start reading those things. So again, it made me realise, there's all this stuff. And so, but when I was there, I was kind of political in the sense that I gave a shit about what was going on, but I didn't align myself to anything other than saw myself as being on the left rather than the right. Yeah, I rejected all that, and I was very kind of anti-Thatcherism and all that kind of stuff at the time. It was just it was the lines were stark. Yeah, and you did that, but I wasn't like embedded as a Marxist or anything like that. These things just all interested me. Yeah, they were interesting, and it made me think, and I'd think through them and link them up and stuff like that. Yeah.
just on the bio stuff, I was going to ask you about your kids and their names, because you've got a lad called Sid, and I can guess where his name comes from.
Well, there's multiple Sids. One, of course, is Sid Vicious. Actually, he's a funny figure, isn't he? Really, he's not a good role model.
Oh no!
But there's also Sid Bishop in the Pink Fairies. So,
right.
and I like the Carry On film. So Sid
right.
As well.
Oh yeah, and then your daughter's called Rosa.
Yeah.
I'm slightly envious because before my daughter was born, we were going to call her Rosa after Rosa Luxemburg.
Yeah.
But some good friends of ours had a little girl a couple of months earlier and called her Rosa, and I thought, well, we can't do that now. And my daughter's mother has subsequently procreated with another bloke since we did, and that child is called Rosa. And I've met lots of other people with children called Rosa, and I just keep,
you missed the boat.
Yes, I missed the boat on that. Question of timing. But, is she named after Rosa Luxemburg?
Yeah, although it wasn't like I must call my child Rosa Luxemburg. It was at the time we were looking at the books on the bookshelves, and I had a biography of Rosa Luxemburg and thought that's a really nice name, and then it was like, and it's Rosa Luxemburg, an iconic figure. So
I mean, I've sometimes taken my daughter to Berlin and shown her a spot where Rosa Luxemburg was thrown in the river and all of that sort of stuff. I did give her the middle name Natalia after Natalia Trotsky, so she has got a little bit of Bolshevism in her there. But anyway, let's turn to the big questions. I was going to start by just asking you to, John Savage, in his comment on your book No Future, which I would describe it basically as a sociological analysis of punk rock and what it meant sociologically, described punk as a complex and vexed subject. How would you define punk?
I think of it as a process and a critique. I think in the book I call it a cultural, in a very academic way, I call it a cultural process of critical engagement, because I don't think you can pin it down and align it to anything specific. It's a series of things coming together, and what I think punk did best was it allowed you to look critically and express your disaffection with the world. And so I see it more as a process than a thing.
So, and not so much as a musical style or a musical genre.
No, music was one of the key mediums for punk, but the practice and process of punk you can apply to other things. But I do think punk's creative.
Yeah.
And I also think the idea that I've always had more sympathetic with people doing punk than saying they are a punk, which I've always found a bit confusing what that actually means, because it often ends up with people acting in a kind of affected way, which
well, I mean, I obviously you weren't around as a teenager in 1979 or whatever, but there would be a lot of discussion amongst me and my mates and lots of other people about who was and who wasn't punk, who was a poser, who was a sellout. And I've observed the same process with my daughter when she was a teenage emo, having the same discussions about who is and isn't emo.
All subcultures do it.
Yeah,
every single one. The mods did it.
But also, a lot of being a member of many subcultures requires you to deny being a member of that subculture. I mean, I don't think we did that with punk, but there's certainly some subcultures.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the other question I kind of had then is why in particular is punk worthy of academic study?
Well, to be honest, I think everything is worthy of academic study. I think punk for me was worthy of it because it impacted me, and you could call it my version of a midlife crisis of like I'd done lots of stuff on the interwar history of Britain, politics of Britain, and I wanted to do something else, and I was just thinking, well, why do I think in the way that I think, and why do I see the world in the way that I do? And that was partly because of what happened to me as a teenager, and key to that was punk and the associated kind of cultures and musics and whatever that came with it. So I kind of wanted to look at what does the world look like if you use punk as a historical, again academic word, a lens to look at the world. How has that shaped how I understand it? And so that was the idea behind the book, was to look at how those things, your kind of cultural taste and your politics, they don't always. Some people are very successful at keeping these things incredibly separate, but they can coalesce and inform one another. And what I also thought, punk for me was particularly so, was because, like I said earlier, it had this it always presented itself early on as being relevant. One of the criticisms of what had happened to hippie was that it had become complacent. Rock and roll was irrelevant. It didn't mean anything. People weren't singing about what was going on. And punk did. So if it's claiming to be relevant and engaged, well, that's suggesting that it's relating to the world around it. It's commenting on it and responding to it. So it worked quite well as a way of thinking, well, how did a section of young people see the world if they were expressing themselves through a cultural medium rather than a overtly big P political medium?
Where did punk come from?
I think it came from lots of different sources. I kind of see punk as a coalescing of things at a particular moment of time. It's got various influences and strands that kind of have come together into the mid 1970s, and then the reason punk then dissipates into lots of different post-punk subcultures and different forms is because that coming together then kind of evolves out, and so from the same thing you're going to get the New Romantics on the one hand and Oi on the other. But that goes through this moment of 1976, 77 in the British context. And of course there's American influences and some political influences, and there's various musical influences. But I think I see it as a kind of coalescing of various things at a particular moment of time, really.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking about. I mean, certainly musically, my understanding, and I think brought out in your book, is that sort of what was punk in the UK 1976 had been imported from New York by Malcolm McLaren, who'd, there was a scene there with all those bands like the Ramones and the New York Dolls, the Heartbreakers and what have you. Was my kind of understanding about musically where it kind of originated, if you like.
It's what the bands that people like Jones and Matlock were into who wrote the music, wasn't it? And they were into like the Faces and the kind of R&B in the 60s, and they liked a bit of Roxy music, but they always liked their rock and roll, didn't they?
I mean, I remember reading a review of one journalist who described the Sex Pistols' music, not the lyrics, but the music, as basically being sounding like Bad Company. It wasn't. I mean, the lyrics were, if you like, revolutionary, but musically, it wasn't really.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about them is that they appeared somehow. Something about them made them seem new, even if the further away we get in time, the more almost traditional rock and roll it sounds. But something seemed new and different, and that was partly how they looked, and it was partly rotten. I think if you took Johnny Rotten out of it, and you take the aesthetics out of it, you've got a mid-70s rock and roll band.
Yeah.
If you put those aspects in, and it becomes something completely different, which is why it needs a number of factors for it to suddenly distinguish itself as something apparently distinct, I think.
Yeah. Also, I was going to ask you about the level of moral outrage and approprium. It's not like I was going to ask you about the moral outrage that punk met. The Daily Mail in particular, but I mean, as a result, councils around the country banned the Sex Pistols from playing in their towns and things like that, which is something I can't imagine that could ever happen again. But it says something about where society was at the time.
Yeah, I mean, there was a definite element of deliberate provocation in what the Pistols were doing, and what Malcolm and Vivian were doing in the shop with the clothes. It was meant to provoke, and so there is a provocation there. I think what's interesting about it is that you had some stuff in the music press because of kind of some fisticuffs at some of the gigs, and it was becoming a bit kind of, what should we say? A bit, a notion of the punk came with violence.
Oh yeah, I mean, I remember reading stories about Jean-Jacques Brunel from the Stranglers assaulting journalists who gave them a bad review. And there was stuff in '76 as the Pistols gig where they have a fight in the audience, and so it's got associated with that. But the moment it kind of goes from being music press based to being a kind of more broader moral panic is obviously the Grundy incident. And what's interesting about that is the thing that upset. That was, for those who don't know, that was when the Sex Pistols swore on the Bill Grundy show on Granada TV. London Weekend.
LWT, but it was the fact that they swore. I mean Thames actually. It was the fact that they swore and they appeared antisocial or uncouth that caused the panic. The fact Simon Barker's wearing a swastika, no one mentions at the time. They're not asking them really about their politics, although Grundy makes a kind of thing about are you anti-establishment. But the thing that provoked was them swearing and appearing antisocial, and I think that's really interesting. It's not until you got God Save the Queen really that there's the notion that this is something more seditious, hence the Seditionaries name of the shop change kind of signals that he got something a bit more seditious. And by that time too, you've got bands like The Clash who are obviously a lot more politically conscious in an obvious way coming.
Yeah,
through.
well, because I was going to say, I mean, I can even remember as a teenager going around with a marker pen drawing anarchist signs on litter bins and things like that, without any conscious understanding at that time of what anarchy was, or put it in a way, the Pistols themselves were not anarchists. No. Yeah, I mean there were, Crass were, for example.
And when there's time when they released Anarchy in the UK, there's one or two interviews at the time, and people there asked, what's anarchy? McLaren said, it's self-rule. It's a kind of general term, but it's also an interesting term because anarchy is something that can be terrifying, and in the press at the time, in the political discourse at the time, Britain is in crisis, it's in decline, we are heading for anarchy. And then also anarchy is really exciting because it's throwing everything up in the air. It's the thrill of the chaos and the confusion, and there's something thrilling about it. So I think anarchy is a really clever word that they use because it's both terrifying and liberating at the same time. And I think, again, knowing me, I'm reading too much into it, but I don't think that these things filter down. And I think that's what made it quite an exciting thing. And the really exciting moment is before punk is properly named and people don't know what this is, and they can't box it and they can't pigeonhole it. They're not sure, are the Sex Pistols on our side or their side? Are they good? Are they bad? And people don't know. And I think that's a really exciting moment in pop culture.
Oh yeah, but it's something. I mean, I've talked about this with my daughter. For example, who, she's a keen music fan as well. But I can't imagine. Well, the nearest thing I can approximate to it, modern times, there was a bit of moral panic over drill music, but that was really kind of covert racism, really. Because it was about black youth expressing themselves and so on. I think
it's also important to why punk it had the impact that it did was how the media was at the time, because really the 70s is when the media is at its most concentrated, which is important because it meant everybody's watching the same channels and everyone's reading the same papers in a way that's so different today when the media's absolutely dispersed over so many different streams. So you haven't got that concentrated moment where something, when it breaks through, can really break through in the way that did. So I think that is important. I guess also people have become more savvy at reading the process, because in a way the Sex Pistols gave the game away.
Well, in fact, actually, now I think about it, the nearest analogy is what's just gone on at Glastonbury. I thought the Israeli government and the IDF were the villains in this situation, but apparently it turns out it's a bunch of punky rappers instead.
Yeah, and it shows people still get upset about what people say. Pop can still have its moment and have its can say its thing. I mean, people get a load of the brickbats thrown at them for doing it, but it shows it. It's still a platform for people to say something.
Oh yeah, exactly. Well, I was going to ask about sort of, and you've sort of touched on it, that punk wasn't a coherent political movement, but it did very much. The elements of punk kind of grew out of the social and political upheavals of the 1970s and the early 80s, and that ultimately came to an end with the defeat of the miners' strike, and to my mind was probably the most potentially revolutionary period in modern British history, certainly since the general strike anyway, sort of thing. So it was a response to circumstance, but it wasn't necessarily that, there wasn't an agenda, there wasn't a manifesto, was there, sort of thing, or it wasn't necessary to subscribe to certain political views to be punk.
No, not at all. And a lot of the people doing punk, it starts off really as a cultural critique. It's I don't like the pop music that's around at the moment. I don't like what's on Radio 1. I don't like what's on Top of the Pops. I don't like the trousers people are wearing, and I want something different. And nothing's changing much at the moment. I want something new. So there's kind of disaffection. There's always a bit of disaffection in punk. I think you see it in the fanzines of the time. Once the Grundy incident happens again, there's a kind of that critique. Well, the media are saying it different to how it is, and you begin to get your kind of disaffection at them not playing what you want them to play, and also how they're framing you as a young person. So you begin to get these dots you can join. But yeah, the politics of the Clash and the Pistols and the Damned and the Susie and the Banshees, they're all over the place. It's not that what they share is a desire to do something new and different. That's a response to what has happened before.
Yeah. The other thing, which personally I think is a bit of a misnomer, is the idea that it was a working class art form. Initially, anyway, I would suggest it came largely out of the art colleges rather than council estates. And it was only the development of what was initially called Oi punk, which that was working class punk sort of thing.
I think, again, why I get very fixated on the Pistols, because within the Sex Pistols there's everything that comes later. So you've got your McLaren with these clever ideas and his art project. You've got Jamie Reid who frames them in these kind of with these situationist politics. You've got all of that. But then you've also got Steve Jones and Paul Cook, which is the grain of your Oi really later on. They're the working class kids left behind, don't really see much of a future for themselves. I mean, Paul Cook was a trainee electrician, wasn't he, at the time? But Steve Jones, delinquent, Borstal, he's that strand. Then you've got the odd bod Johnny Rotten, the kind of autodidact weird kid with odd ideas, and so you've got all these little elements in there that mean it's going to go off in lots of different directions. So again, I always think trying to say punk was either art school or working class, it's a kind of false binary, really. It was all these things, part of the coalescence, another things that all coalesce, and that early milieu of people around the Sex Pistols is really, and around early punk, are an interesting bunch of people coming together. All the members of the Clash are interesting in their own right. Yeah. All the members of the Pistols are interesting in their right. And all the kind of suburban lot coming into this to find excitement in the city. And then you've got your kind of Paul Wellers out in Woking, again, being excited about what's happening in London, trying to get in there. It's an interesting mix. I think pop music tends to do that. In the art schools, although, become their own thing, it was a way for working class kids to carry on in education as well for a bit. So you get that funny little tension between these kind of established institutions and people coming into them who've never gone into anything like that before, and it creates something different. It's a great moment, I think, in British history, and it's something we've lost a bit in the way that education's gone since.
Well, something I was thinking about, because being there at the time, there's always a debate about when did punk end. What was that initial kind of inertia and that initial movement? And many people said it was when the Clash signed to CBS. By contrast, Crass were an anarchist band who issued... Well, let me put it another way. One of the major sort of strands, political strands, if you like, of punk was anti-music, the music industry and the music establishment.
Yeah.
And that... I mean, had there been much by way of independent labels before punk?
Yeah, I mean, there always were independent labels, but not in a consciously kind of political way. I mean, you could talk about some of the things like the Communist Party was, involved with Topic Records for folk, and Henry Cow, I think, were thinking of doing their own label. They might even have set it up. And you had like independents putting out experimental music and things that were nominally independent but run as small businesses. But I think punk's interesting because it does make that kind of a culturally conscious political decision to be independent. And I always think, if you think of the Sex Pistols were a kind of kamikaze mission into the heart of the industry to blow it up and create this destabilize it and allow this space to open up for all these kids to run in and do magnificent things. So you've got that, but then also from Buzzcocks putting out Spiral Scratch showed you could do it yourself, and then other people following their lead. Rough Trade being a kind of a classic example, but then Crass kind of take it to another level because they're trying to create ways to circumnavigate basically everything about the industry and create literally an alternative cultural stream, really, in order to facilitate their politics. So I found Crass fascinating at the time because now everyone knows a lot about Crass. It's quite easy to find stuff out about them. At the time, it was really quite, so especially when you were young like me, 11, 12, it's really hard. They were just this name. You didn't see pictures of them very much. You didn't put pictures of themselves on the sleeve. When you bought a record, you just got essays about Nagasaki, and you got links to bookshops and really odd artwork by G. And it was like kind of heading into some subterranean underground cult, really. And I think people say that similar about Throbbing Gristle, who I didn't really know much about at the time, got into later on. But another kind of way into this real underground of dissident ideas and practices and possibilities.
Well, I think actually, I can quote you from your book. I think you describe punk as opening up a space, if you like. I mean, I can remember being there at the time. The whole DIY ethos and the fact that you could be a musician. You didn't need to be Pink Floyd or Led Zeppelin or aspire to be that sort of, a bunch of kids can get together in the bedroom, write a few tunes and go and play them sort of thing.
And that for me is the politics of punk, is that it gave people agency. It meant that you participated, you didn't spectate, that you were active, you weren't passive, that you were involved, you weren't simply consuming.
Yeah.
And it was for me is the politics of punk. It gave people a practice or praxis, if we want to get political about it, a way of doing in a way that would inform your being. And I think that's what was great about it.
Yeah.
Is that and it's why pop music was so vibrant, even in the charts. And a lot of people, that new pop moment in the early 80s, where lots of people just doing quite different things, with lots of different sounds and styles and looks. Most of those people had been touched by the hand of punk to lead them to where they got to.
Yeah. Because, you mentioned fanzines, because one of your books is History of Fanzines, and I recently went, and I'm sure some people listening to this podcast will have been to your talk at the Holloway on the history of fanzines. I think I got this from the cover of your book, actually. Ian Curtis of Joy Division once said, "Fanzines, you are the future of the world." Discuss.
Good old Ian Curtis. I mean, again, they were a great example of that thing of the punk's DIY thing. Doing, if you don't like what the music press say, make your own music press, and do that. If you don't like it's the like the Crass lyric in Big A Little A, isn't it? If you don't like what's on the telly, switch it off and do something else. And
you won't. I don't know if you will remember it. There used to be a BBC children's television.
Why don't you?
Why don't you turn off the television and go and do something more interesting instead?
As I was saying. But fanzines were a great example of that, and they were also a really good way of getting involved in something if you were a bit too shy to get on stage and do something, or you didn't quite have the connections to get involved. You were on the periphery.
Or Steve, I think it was from your book, Mark Perry said, "Well, I wanted to be involved in punk, couldn't play. I was tone deaf, but I could produce fanzines."
Fanzines, yeah. Steve Shy from Manchester, he says something similar. He was like, I didn't know how to get involved, and he was at a gig, and one of Buzzcocks said to him, "We'll do a fanzine." And quite a few people I talked to when I was doing the fanzine book was like, you could go to a gig, and it was a good way of getting to know people. Do you want to buy my fanzine? And you might have a chat. And so it was a good way in. So they were really, proper little networks grew up as a result of the fanzine.
Yeah.
People I know are still mates today who met each other sending their kind of 12 bits of paper through the post.
Yeah. But I mean, again, there were also people who are now, became established writers who started off in fanzines.
Absolutely. It was another way of becoming something else. In the book, what I like about Mark Perry's story, I mean, he's an exceptional example, but it's informative, is that he goes from being a bored bank clerk to, by getting to punk and doing a fanzine, to becoming a musician, a kind of talking head on the television, a writer, an A&R man, and running Step Forward Records. And he becomes something else. Punk seemed to enable people to totally change who they were and where the direction their life was going, which is what I think makes it, going back to your question, why it's a really interesting thing to look at.
Yeah.
Historically.
Because I was thinking beforehand, any form of music is a sociological phenomena, but whether it's worthy of study or not is another question, in sense of... I don't know that Euro disco, for example, is worthy of sociological study.
I'm sure we could find a way.
Well, there might actually be somebody who does who does write on those sorts of subjects. But I was kind of interested in, the legacy of fanzine. I mean, you've kind of touched on it, but, it fed into, certainly in the 80s, there was a whole rash of style and fashion magazines, like ID, for example, that had kind of grown out of or mimicked the fanzine kind of aesthetic.
It's really quickly how the fanzine aesthetic feeds into the mainstream press. I mean, things like even NME certainly start adopting bits of it, and we're going back to our politics. You see things like some of the kind of SWP or Communist Party papers for young people start, putting blackmail lettering in, giving it a punky edge, and stuff like Spare Rib, the feminist magazine, has a young person's magazine called Shocking Pink, and it's all punk graphics, and it's incredible how it goes in. But you're right, ID was printed first 4, I think, maybe more issues of ID were printed at Better Badges near Rough Trade, which was where a lot of the fanzines were printed. They had there was some money behind ID, so it was always going to be something different. But it's interesting how it came through that same kind of process. I think what fanzines also did, what punk was great about fanzines, was that it got rid of the idea that fanzines had to be quite kind of train spottery, factual documents of people's fandom. That it could really be anything. You can do what you want in a fanzine. So out of some of the best fanzines, there's people talking about what they watched on the telly, what band they saw, what records they like, what they did the night before, and it almost paves way to that idea of a magazine being about whatever you want it to be. It doesn't have to be genre specific.
And your book tells the story of fanzines through from 76 to 86.
88, I think I go up to. Yeah.
Are you going to do a second volume of?
No. That was I had to read so many. I've collected and gathered together so much material. It was quite a hard thing to do, really. And I just think everything, when we get, I mean, it's always artificial where you end something, because things never start exactly and they never end exactly. I mean, with the punk book, I ended at 84 because 1984, Orwellian, miners' strike, all these things kind of I could make an argument for it. With the fanzines, it's slightly more different, but 1988 seemed right because you suddenly got rave and acid house really shifts the cultural focus. And it's a recognisable shift in the cultural focus. But fanzines obviously carry on, and they carry on today. I mean, you were showing me a fanzine earlier today that you just picked up. People make them. It's great. People do it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I said I'd give her a shout out. Dead Wax, it's called, and produced by a woman called Blossom Boyce, which is you can pick up in various places like the Playhouse Bar and all these places around town where you get these things.
And that's the great thing. They're scattered. They're always scattered around. You just pick them up and put them down. They're ostensibly ephemeral in that they're just you pick it up, flick through it, put it down, but then someone else will pick it up. But also they're from a historian's point of view, they're a great little source because they're not filtered through a kind of publishing house or anything like that. They're very much of a moment.
Well, there's no gatekeeping involved.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Well, because funny enough, because I remember, well, it's in the book, but also when you're talking about how fanzines, in a sense, had kind of started within sci-fi circles, maybe back in the 1930s or so on. And funny enough, I actually had a chat with Blossom before today, so I knew a bit more about background of what she does, and she was saying, her style comes from a magazine called Deadline, which was featured Tank Girl. Yeah. I mean, I don't know that, but you might know what she's talking about.
Yeah, no, I mean, fanzines become very associated with music because punk absolutely multiplies the number of fanzines. But fanzines, they have there's people say there's different lines you could follow. The usual line is it's back to sci-fi fanzines because that's where the term comes from. Fanzine was coined to differentiate homemade fan magazines from professional magazines, prozines and fanzines. But then you can find people making their own media in lots of different areas as well. They just didn't have a word for it.
Yeah.
So there are different ways. People made their own comics. There's a account of kind of about girl zines or women's zines where they trace it back to kind of late 19th or 20th century of kind of young women making their own kind of scrapbooks, essentially, just of the bits in the media that spoke to them in a media that generally didn't. You know? So they always pull what they could from anywhere to make their own interesting piece of media.
Well, because I mean, something I'd wondered. I mean, I know I asked you at the talk actually about what digital technology did to fanzines, but something I've kind of observed myself, and Blossom said this about the fanzine, is that Gen Z, being very generalist talking about Gen Z, you know, as you can talk about all the other generations and characteristics, but there is a clamouring for tangible product, which is, you know, partly fueling the revival in vinyl, it's fueling a revival in fanzines and so on. I mean, is that something that you have, as an academic, any interest in studying?
I don't know if I'd study it, but I'm interested in it. I'm too much of a historian. I feel more certain about the past than I do about the present. But it's a recognisable thing, without a doubt. That, I mean, because people thought when everything went desktop that would be the end of this kind of thing. And a lot of zines did go online, and a lot of online zines did and do and still exist. But there's definitely been a swing back towards a more material culture. And I think it's partly, like you say, people like the feel of something.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I do think online life is alienating. You know, I do think it isolates. I do think it kind of disengages people from a lot of the world and engages you with a very partial bit of the world, even though it's global.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, even if people aren't consciously thinking these things through, you feel it. And I think there's something nice about doing stuff with people and doing stuff with things and stuff and touching it and feeling it. So your senses, isn't it? You know.
Yeah.
So.
Slightly facetious question then. As a historian, when you look back, when does history start? How far do you go back to start? Well, I say it in the sense of, I remember my daughter coming home from school one day and saying that they'd been learning about Thatcher and the miners' strike in history.
Yeah.
Well, that's not history to me. That's my life.
That's your life. I know it's difficult. At the moment, people are beginning to write histories, which certainly are in the 1990s, which I'd recognise as history, which is, you know, that's my life as well. I'm like, blimey. I don't know. It's a tricky one. I mean, people always talk, don't they? Like, what is it? Journalists write the first draft, and then politics is the second draft, and history is the third draft, or something like that.
Yeah.
There's some kind
but also history is written by the victors.
It can be, yeah. Yes. Although that's one good thing nowadays, is I think history is open to a lot more voices than it was 40, 50 years ago. You know, and it's a very much, this is all good old E.P. Thompson. It's the idea of history from below, and that the other voices matter. It's not just the voice of the victors isn't the only voice to be heard, which inspired my fanzines, because the history of punk and pop music shouldn't just be the voice of the NME. Yeah, you know, it's also the voices of the people who were in the little clubs in Chester. Yeah, watching Third on the Bill. Oh,
something that amused me reading your book, because I'm pretty sure it was your book, because I've read other things, reviews of your books and things as well the last few weeks. I think it came from your book about how the music press in the 70s and 80s, the NME, Record Mirror, Sounds, Melody Maker, had a readership beyond the sales figures because they were shared in familial groups. And it just reminded me, my brother got NME and I got Sounds, but there were a hell of a lot of arguments between us when one refused to give the other one.
I think it's one of the undertones, I can't remember what one now, his little autobiography, and in that he talks about them buying the NME, and there was like a house of 8 brothers or something, and you know, it got shared round. So and a student house would buy 1 or 2 of and everyone would read them. And so, although they were selling a lot, I can't remember the figures off the top of my head. The number who read, they always kind of multiplied them by 4 or 5 was the actual readership. I've
got a vague recollection from your book of a figure of 3 million circulation,
something like that.
Collectively
of all 4 of those. How many people a week would watch it, would read it? Yeah, it has sometimes been estimated at about 3 million, which could be a bit high, but it certainly is a lot, because they were certainly selling 250,000 copies each. You know.
Yeah. Something else, slight change of subject, but something that kind of occurred to me whilst reading your book, and I've never really thought about it, but we've talked about punk and exploring political ideas and so on, is that before punk and post-punk, sexual identity and sexual politics had not been explored in music in any great way at all.
Well, I guess it kind of had. unconsciously or accidentally. I mean, Bowie, we could always talk about Bowie.
Yeah.
And he's, I'm bisexual or whatever, or I'm gay interview in 1972 is in there. There's certainly not a kind of it certainly doesn't quite have the traction that it does after once punk gets in. That kind of polysexual group of people, again, around the Pistols, really. All the people in the Bromley contingent and that kind of stuff. And from America, you got Wayne County and all that, and all that kind of stuff. That it becomes that again. It's punks turning the world on its head, isn't it? It's good to be queer, not bad to be queer. You know? So it's that turning the world on its head. I think punk is very important. For all that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think about all the feminist bands, the Raincoats and Kleenex and people like that sort of thing, which that. Bands of that nature hadn't had a voice before.
Yeah,
if there had been.
I always think it's just one of punk's one of the tired of how what rock and roll had become by the mid 1970s, and if you're saying that, you're quite right to ask, okay, so what's wrong with it? And often people say, oh, it was the prog rock bands playing too long, boring, or is all you had to be technically proficient. But also another critique, which was being developed in feminist circles of the time, was that it was become really macho and it was kind of boorish. And I think what's interesting with rock in the early 70s to mid 70s,
rock music traditionally has been pretty misogynistic, hasn't it?
Often is. But what's really interesting in the 70s, it's not. It's also aged. It's not teenagers making the music anymore. It's not soppy boys wanting to hold your hand, or maybe even kind of go further. But it's predatory men. You think of the rock stars of the early 70s, your Robert Plants, that we're now people in their high 20s. They're not 19-year-olds anymore.
But also, if you listen to the lyrics of, say, something like "Hey Joe," I'm going to go down to Mexico way and shoot my woman up because I've heard she's been playing around. Those sorts of themes weren't not uncommon in.
No, and there's a feminist critique emerging into the 1970s of just all that, and also about the infantilization of people. The babies and the honeys and all that. And you see that in the punk discourse of we don't use those words. That kind of anti-love song thing that was early on in punk, or what Buzzcocks do is reinvent how you write a love song. You don't often hear gender defined in a Buzzcocks lyric. It's not sure. You're not sure if it's a he singing to a she, or if the voice is coming from a male or a female in terms of who the character of the voice is. Pete Shelley always left it really open and ambivalent.
Well, I was going to say. Pete Shelley's an example, but I mean, punk also opened up a space where people could be themselves, their sexual identity.
Yeah, and it's funny because people always talk about Tom Robinson, I guess, because he was very politically out there and he glad to be gay and all that. But Shelley was always very open about it in all those early interviews about when asked about it.
Yeah,
but for him, I don't think for him it wasn't the central focus.
Oh no, he wasn't. Yeah, he wasn't a campaigner in that sense.
It was just that was who he was.
Yeah. Something else I wanted to ask about, again, you touch on it in the book, but it's a relationship between punk and reggae. Certainly a lot of punk gigs, early punk gigs, you'd have DJs will play reggae records in between the bands, but, then a lot of bands, the Clash in particular, but there almost became a point where if you were a punk band, you had to do at least one reggae tune.
Every punk album has a reggae song.
Sort of thing. And I'm kind of, Bob Marley wrote a song called Punky Reggae Party, for example. Lee Perry produced the Clash's Complete Control single, for example. That, and then you had the growth of all those British reggae bands like Steel Pulse and Misty and Roots and so on. And I was just interested in your analysis of what that was all about.
Yeah, I think quite a lot of the people in the early stages of punk liked reggae. So, Rotten was a big reggae fan, wasn't he? Paul Simonon loved reggae. It's an interview in Sniffing Glue in 76.
Virgin sent Rotten off to do A&R in Jamaica, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. And when he does his famous interview on Capital Radio where McLaren was upset because he's giving the game away of what he was interested in, quite a lot of the songs on there were reggae songs. And there's an interview in Sniffing Glue at the end of 1976 where the Clash are being interviewed, and I can't remember who's doing it's not Mark Perry, one of the others, Steve Mick or something, is doing the interview with them and says, what bands do you like? and they talk. I think Mick Jones talks a bit about Mott the Hoople and Joe Strummer or something. But Paul Simon just says 3 reggae bands: the Rulers, Viceroys, and the Kingstonians, or something.
Yeah.
I'm not remembering exactly what 3, but he says 3 reggae bands. You just think that's really interesting. That they're his influences, and I think so. Right at the start, he got that thing, and also you can see in some of the early writings about punk at the time. There's a sense that punk's a rebel music in the way that reggae's a rebel music, and so people making these connections, and the Clash are going to firm that up when they do Police and Thieves. And also you've got Don Letts being the DJ at the Roxy, and as he says, there weren't any 4, 5 punk singles out by the start of 77.
That's my understanding.
So what else do you play?
Yes,
and so he played what he played, and he was connected. He was part of that world, and so he played the reggae. So not by default, it's kind of partly by design, but it all kind of comes together as a synergy between punk and reggae, which is quite important at the time in the context of people playing around with swastikas.
Yeah, you've just reminded me of an amusing anecdote, which might or might not stay in the podcast, which I think it was a Public Image gig at the Manchester Apollo, but they were supported by Linton Kwesi Johnson. And he's got a track called 5 Nights of Bleeding. Well, my mate had misheard it and thought he said 25 Nights of Bleeding. It goes through chapters, night 1 and night 2. My mate's looking, how long's this tune going to last?
That does remind me, actually, on the T-shirt that McLaren and I think Bernie Rhodes was involved with it as well in 74. When you're going to wake up in the morning and know what side of the bed you're on, and half of it's their loves and half of it's their hates. On the love side, it's things like King Tubby's sound system, along with Gene Vincent. So there's even that early on. There's this marrying where they're on the rebel, odd bod side, not the kind of boring establishment like all round entertainer side. So they've already kind of put them together before punk's really up and running. The Sex Pistols are just a little idea at that point because Cutie Jones and his Sex Pistols is on the T-shirt, but they haven't done anything yet. Rotten's not even in the band yet. So it's quite interesting. Right there, you can see this. Okay, so we're on that side with reggae.
Yeah. Something else I was going to ask about, which you didn't touch on in the book, and I hadn't thought about it till, in fact, I spent a few days with my sister earlier this week, and I was talking about your work and this podcast and stuff, and she asked me, what's he got to say about punk and alternative comedy?
Yeah, well, I guess
in the sense of you wouldn't have had the young ones if you didn't have punk, probably.
No, it shared that kind of irreverence and that idea that we've got to get rid of what's gone before, because what's gone before has had its day, and so there's definitely a kind of analogy that can be made by that, and you can kind of see the kind of irreverence and the kind of notion of kind of ripping everything up and doing something different. That's really evident. Obviously, the young ones are the most, as you say, it's the kind of classic example of that. So I think there's something there's a cultural moment happening, and punk's reverberations through the culture that links it to some aspects of alternative comedy as well. Yeah.
But you didn't include that in the book.
No, because I'm not.
Or is it not a subject you've been particularly interested in? So I'm not saying you should be interested in it.
Yeah, because I find it gets a bit messy, I think. Because I can see the link, and I think something's going on there, but I haven't thought it through in depth. And I think there's probably lots of things that, where you can make the analogy very generally, but when you start boiling it down, it gets more complicated, I think. Yeah. And what are the parameters of alternative comedy? Are Fry and Laurie alternative comedy, or are they quite traditional? But they were on Saturday Night Live, and so it gets all.
But it's the same argument about who was and wasn't punk, sort of, and was signing to a major label. No, I can see what you mean.
But there's definitely a comparable cultural tilt or shift happening. Because you were saying, but you were going to ask about if punk was a revolution. I always think that word's overused. What punk was a really important cultural intervention.
Yeah. One question which I haven't touched on. I mean, we did talk about the origins of punk, but it's American punk. To my mind, I'm talking about the music rather than necessarily culture, but it was taken out of New York by people like Malcolm McLaren. That punk scene wasn't a global or national thing in the States. It was a very local scene. Came over here, and then British punk was re-exported back to America, which is what then led to bands like the Dead Kennedys and ultimately Black Flag and Minor Threat and Fugazi and things like that. And am I right in thinking that's...
Yeah, I think it's messier than that, but without a doubt, McLaren goes there to see and likes some of the things he sees, and it becomes part of the jigsaw puzzle he's putting together.
Yeah.
But it's quite interesting how long the word punk is floating around in the early 70s in the music press and stuff like that. And so then obviously Patti Smith releases Horses, and it's already in the ether because of the New York Dolls, and this term's it's almost like they're looking for something British to pin it on, and because McLaren's got the link to New York Dolls, it becomes very simple to transport it.
But a similar-ish process to the way that the British blues bands of the 60s discovered all the American blues artists, and then re-exported that music back to white American college kids who suddenly realised that they had this rich heritage of music on their doorstep that they knew nothing about.
Yeah, there's definitely always this transatlantic dialogue going on. I mean, I always think the person who kind of slightly skews the kind of New York Britain thing again is Johnny Rotten, because he's just not like, I know people say, he had the same haircut as Richard Hell, kind of. I think he had that haircut anyway. He's just the fly in the ointment all the time, isn't he? That made the Pistols so distinctive.
Is that what the Wire song's about?
Possibly. It's about Johnny. But yeah, and I love those interviews with him in the 70s, those first 76, early 77 interviews with Johnny Rotten, where sometimes he looks really vulnerable and a bit kind of like weak, and then other times he just locks in and he has that stare and he just cuts through things like into almost to the heart of stuff. And I think those moments are electrifying, and I wasn't watching it at the time. It wasn't that long after. It was 4 or 5 years after I was beginning to find this stuff out, and it still affected me then. But at the time, I can really see when you see him just say, don't accept the old order, get rid of it, and you're just like, whoa, this is amazing.
I guess, would it be fair to say that Johnny Rotten actually understood what was going on, that that the rest of the band necessarily didn't?
I think he had his own version of what he was doing and why he was doing it. He's just at that time he's just such a fascinating, difficult character. He doesn't fit the mould of anything that's been before.
Oh no,
it's made him so interesting. And again, it's what's made punk seem so different. I think it's a lot to do with him. I think.
But do you think that then the American punk that grew up sort of late 80s into the 90s, and the Black Flags and the Minor Threats and the Fugazis and stuff, represented anything analogous in terms of a social development?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, they're quite. I think those bands are a long way from the Sex Pistols, but they're not a long way from punk more generally. And what I find interesting about those American punk bands is they were absorbing all the British punk, but they don't make the distinctions that we do over here. I mean, you'll remember it at the time. It's like, Exploited are a cartoon punk band, but I do like Crass or whatever, or Discharge. In America, they was just liked everything, which is a bit like me, age 10 or 11, actually, where I didn't make those differentials.
So what you're saying is Americans aren't discerning consumers.
they weren't discerning consumers. But then I have a sympathy for that, because when I was 9, 10, 11, I wasn't discerning. I loved those Exploited records as well. And then I'd play the Buzzcocks, and to me it was just all part of this interesting stuff. And I've tried to retain that, really, because the music press used to like trying to divide up.
Yeah.
And I remember in the same week buying Dare by the Human League and a Cockney Rejects single. And to me, it was just all part of this interesting popular music stuff that had evolved out of this thing. And I could obviously see the difference and hear the difference. Yeah. But to me, it was all just interesting.
Well, it was all part of this new phenomenon of music making.
It's all part of the culture. Yeah. They're doing different things. I'm not saying they were bedfellows or anything like that, but to me, it was all part of the interesting cultural firmament. I wouldn't have used that word at the time, but firmament that I was finding fascinating.
Because I don't think any of the British punk bands really broke. I mean, Clash
were the closest, weren't they?
Yeah, to making it in America.
And Billy Idol kind of did after
he did, but yes,
Gen
I'd
X had
suggest that's not that's not a punk, is it?
His autobiography is hilarious.
Is it?
So,
yeah.
Just how he writes is brilliant.
Yeah. I was going to leave the big questions of punk alone now and get a bit more parochial and talk about some of your activities in Norwich. Firstly, the Common Lots, the Simon Floyd Community Theatre group who put on shows around Norwich every summer, all of which have a social and political content to them. And I understand they did a show called Songs of Protest a few years ago, and that you had some input into that.
Yeah, I was involved in that. It came out of a project that John Street at UEA put together, of which I was part of. So John won us some money from the Arts and Humanities Research Council to do a study of the English protest song, a history of the English protest song from 1600 to 2020. And I was a co-investigator, is the term, on the project, so I was going to bring some history into it. And what John, along with Alan Finlayson at UEA and Angela from Warwick and Oscar from Newcastle, we all as a team did was we got involved with, or went to the Common Lot and told them about it and wanted them to sing some of the protest songs. And they went further than that and wrote a whole kind of performance and started writing their own protest songs, which for us was great because it showed how us having this idea about the history of protest song engendered people to do stuff again. So that's how it came out of that. So there was a link between our research and what the Common Lot did. And they picked the ball up and ran with it, really, which is what we wanted them to do.
Yeah. I had thought I might ask you at some point about music and revolution, but that's a whole topic in itself, sort of. In the sense of revolution, music has accompanied revolutions, but arguably has not instigated or been a central element in bringing about revolutions. I'm talking about political.
And that's a massive thing to want something to be able to do, isn't it? Because one of the things with the protest song, Alan's good on this, is when we sometimes get but do they work? Do protest songs work? And that's one of those questions. Well, what does that mean? Do they work? Do they bring down the government? No.
Yeah.
Do they introduce a different perspective on something that somebody might listen to and think about? Yes. So that's how they work on that level. In the same way, you'd never, much as Lenin talked about Iskra turning Russia upside down. It's a big ask to ask for a newspaper to fundamentally revolutionise society, or even a single book. They're part of something.
Yeah,
it's part of something. So protest songs actually work in lots of different ways. They provide a soundtrack. They accompany. They bring people together. They make you think. They make you look at things from a slightly different direction. So they work in quite complex ways. But in terms of the big R, big moment of revolutionary change, a song's not going to do that on its own. It's part of the war.
But there are people who like to pretend it.
Oh yeah.
or absolve themselves from revolutionary struggle by claiming that being a musician is. It's back to, again, it's probably what I said in the podcast. You used the term practice earlier. To my mind, as a Trotskyist activist at the time, when I was studying sociology, it was a term invented by the Frankfurt School to absolve themselves from actually engaging in revolutionary practice and simply saying that thinking about revolution was in itself revolutionary practice.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, Liz Naylor from City Fun used it when she was talking about fanzines, and I thought it was good because her use of it was the idea that you learn as you do and that will transform who you are, which I kind of think works quite well in this kind of cultural setting. Fundamental change of the means of the ownership of the means of production will not come out of praxis, but people's lives can change, and on a mic or smaller level, communities and social interactions can change.
Yeah. You're also a member of a group in Norwich who I've heard referred to variously as the Illuminati, or in the confines of the King's Head, you're generally referred to as the Cheese People. I was wondering what all that was about.
Well, that's because my friend Pete used to like eating cheese and wine on a Friday, and you say, so I like cheese and wine too. So we met up on a Friday night and went to the King's Head.
That was, I mean, you're too young to remember. I mean, cheese and wine parties were a mainstay of the English middle class in the 1970s. You know, my parents would host or regularly attend cheese and wine parties.
I know we've gone cheese and beer.
Yeah.
So we kind of took it into the King's Head, and then we did it, and it was nice. And then some other people heard about it and said, "Oh, we'll have to come in." But before we knew it, we were doing it, and there was like kind of 15, 16 people there. So we had this almost this kind of this Illuminati kind of sect had formed.
Where is the word Illuminati come from yourselves, or has somebody else coined that phrase?
Someone coined it. I can't remember who. I don't know if they got it from somewhere else, but it just fitted quite.
Yeah.
And for that, we don't actually have any halloumi ever in the meat and the things, but it kind of worked. But it's my daughter.
I got the impression. I mean, I eat cheese.
Mm-hmm.
I won't call myself a cheese aficionado, but am I right in thinking that part of the object of the exercise is to bring the most obscure cheese you can find?
It's just whatever Jarrold's or the market's got.
Yeah.
Pete he's the monger. He's the chief monger of the Illuminati. He's the connoisseur.
Is he right?
So he does bring, and he remembers all the names, which I can't do. So he kind of brings all those. So we've eaten some odd cheeses. Then my daughter did film at City College, and she had to make a film, and she made her A-level film that she had to make was of the Illuminati, and she did it in the style of like Kenneth Anger or Derek Jarman. She used a Super 8 camera,
right?
And Pete dressed up and looked like Aleister Crowley, and she did it as a kind of almost like this devil worshipping derangement of help
right? Yes,
and she got her A-level, so it obviously worked.
Yes,
so I like to think our Illuminati weaved its magic to help Rosa on her way.
But you do go on road trips as well.
The ale trail lent itself to drinking and eating cheese on the move.
Yeah, I did see, because I don't know if you were part of that party. A party I then went to. There's a cheese place in Covent Garden.
Oh yeah.
In the Seven Dials, what used to be the Seven Dials. I remember going. It was a jazz club actually years ago. I remember going to, but it's now a food court. But there's a speciality cheese. It's a bit like one of those. Sushi conveyor belts or something.
Oh right, with cheese. I haven't been on that trip.
No, I think some of them, a
good.
few of them have done. Is there a how do you become a member of the Illuminati?
Well, we're actually on a bit of a hiatus at the moment because probably because of the cheese and beer. Pete had to just kind of take his foot off the pedal and get his body balanced. Yeah. And so it's not really. We're in abeyance, but it was just word of mouth, really. We just did it, and someone said, "Oh, can I come along?" So all right, pop down and bring some cheese. It was getting a bit out of control.
Right. Yeah. The other thing I was going to ask you about, because are you a season ticket holder at Norwich?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
So Norwich City, discuss.
Yeah. Norwich City. Yeah. Well, I first went to watch Norwich. My dad took me to watch Norwich play in January 1978 when I was 7. We lost to Man City, and that set me up for the rest of my life of not expecting much.
I mean, I'm a lifelong Man City fan, but what I would say, and I know I'm not the only one among City fans who think it was a lot more fun in the 90s when we were rubbish and went down to League One than it has been the last 10 or 15 years.
I think it makes you appreciate the good times when you've had the bad.
Or as I say to people who support teams like Norwich, yeah, you might think that's what you want, but if you get it, if you were bought by a rich Arab oil sheikh and could buy all the best players and the best coach in the world and win everything, it'd soon pall.
I know. I mean, through my life, there's been those odd seasons that have been absolutely amazing, and I love those years. And in between those has been kind of periods where it's all a bit like it is at the moment. Hopefully we'll do well this season, but it's plodding along, waiting for the spark to light and us to go on one of our good seasons.
Well,
and sometimes it used to get. There are times when it kind of gets to you a bit when you're not doing well. I try very hard now not to invest so much into it that it affects my mood too much, and just take each game as it comes. Sometimes you get caught up with it, and also, I mean, this is going to make me sound like some old man, but it does annoy me just how there's a kind of how fans expect every season to be absolutely brilliant. If you're not winning the league, it's terrible, And I just think, well, football.
Well, I mean,
it's that thing about embracing the boredom of football, because football is often pretty dull.
You can only appreciate the great moments if you have suffered through those periods of boredom and
You have to live through those 0-0 draws and those seasons where it doesn't work out, because it's a long process before the idea that it's going to be 90 minutes edited into highlights where everything is kind of top corner overhead kicks. That's not how football is. And again, this is me overthinking stuff, as I do. But football for me is a culture. It's not an entertainment. I don't go to be entertained. I go because it's part of the culture I grew up with and I like being a part of. So the whole bit before and after the game, the whole stuff around the game, for me is as important as the 90 minutes. And I'm not going to the circus or anything. I don't expect people to be juggling and on trapezes and doing all this. I'm going because it's football. It's a sport I love, based in the city that I come from, with people I've grown up with often and have known well, and it's what we do. Yeah. So when you win, it's fantastic, but you have that's not. It's better like what's that jam lyric about being on the fruit machines? You never win, but that's not the point. Is it?
Yeah. I tell you what we'll do now. We'll move on to what I call the quick fire questions round.
Okay.
The idea is I ask a question, you answer it. We're not supposed to get into discussion, but I don't have the self-discipline to stick to that. So I was going to ask you. Well, first question was favourite Norwich venue.
That's a good one. I immediately said, I don't know if it. That's made me stick.
Well, be historic if you want, because I know there are lots of venues that have come and gone.
Yeah.
Before, I've been in Norwich about 10 years, and there's, I hear stories about these legendary venues like Fat Paulies, for example.
For me, it would be the Arts Centre in the 80s. Is my favourite venue. When I first.
How long's that been there then?
Well, when did it? It's been gone through various guises. I'm not going to put a date when it became, but certainly in the 80s when I started going to gigs, were gigs on from the mid 80s when I used to go, and that's where I kind of first started really going to see live bands and slightly whatever we want to call them, indie alternative bands, and so that's what came to mind when you asked the question, was that moment in time when I first started seeing live music and used to go to the Arts Centre.
Well, in fact, that was one of the questions: is which was the first gig you ever went to?
The first gig I ever went to was Burning Spear at the UEA, actually, or was it the Primitives at the UEA in about 87? I can't remember. One of them. It was about the same time.
Yeah. I kind of asked that question because some people, it's an embarrassing boy or girl band they went to see when they were 11 years old or something.
That's who it was.
Sort of thing. Well, I suppose it's... favourite Norwich watering hole. I think I know the answer to it because it's the same as mine.
King's Head. I like the King's Head with the Alex second.
Yes.
And the Leopard third.
Oh, I've not been to the Alex for years. I used to go, early days when I was in Norwich.
Yeah.
But I know. There used to be, I can't remember his name, used to do philosophy nights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's still going. I go there. I meet people I know over that side of the city, and I like the chili.
Right. Yeah.
They do a good veggie chili.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't think I've actually eaten the food there. But,
well, I should.
Have you got a favourite Norwich act, either contemporary or historically? Or in fact, I tell you what,
I like contemporary. What I really loved Kiss Your Teeth, and those two albums Kiss Your Teeth did a couple of years ago.
Sink Your Teeth.
Sink Your Teeth. Why am I saying Kiss Your Teeth?
Do you want to start it again?
Yeah.
Favourite Norwich act?
Sink Your Teeth. Who've released a couple of albums, recently, and I thought they were really doing something. I saw them at the Arts Centre actually, and it's one of those things where you saw someone and just thought, wow, this is bigger than the venue.
Oh yeah,
so it was great stuff.
You might know, I was used to. 15 years ago, I spent a year in between jobs as an assistant in-house promoter at Brixton Windmill. So I know Tim Perry very well, who runs the windmill. He said to me a few years ago that whichever year it was, that Sink Your Teeth were the best band they'd had on at the windmill that year.
Really? Yeah. Maria and Gemma are doing their own thing at the moment, but they were, and both what they do is really good. But that Sink Your Teeth was just such a. I was like, wow, this is great. This is great. So so I guess they're my favourite.
Yeah. I mean, I could also recognise as a Manc where some of the influences were coming from for them. Because also, is Gemma a fully fledged or a semi-detached member of the Illuminati?
I'd say she's fully fledged.
Yeah.
She's entrenched.
Right.
In the cheese.
Yeah. What's your mastermind specialist subject?
It'd be punk, wouldn't it? I guess. Or what else would it be?
Well, I did.
Norwich players in the late 70s or something like
that. Yeah. Okay. The only time I ever got more points on a contestant specialist subject than they got watching Mastermind was a guy who did Joy Division. Mm-hmm. And I got 1 point more than him. I mean, not that I want to go on it, but I don't know if you can do the same subject somebody's done before anyway.
Sure. Well, they must have repeated now. But Joy, actually, just talking about Joy Division, I was saying about Crass being this mysterious band. Back in the 80s, early to mid-80s, and I was discovering Joy Division. At the time, it was really hard to find stuff out about them because... You couldn't go back and you couldn't just get the music press easily. They obviously become New Order. And it was really quite hard.
The other thing a lot of younger people don't appreciate is Joy Division weren't that big at the time. I mean, they had one chart hit, which I think was posthumous. Love Will Tear Us Apart.
Posthumous, yeah.
What was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, that was it. Yeah, because one of my claims to fame, if you like, is that I had a ticket for what turned out to be Joy Division's last gig in Manchester.
Oh, yeah.
And didn't go because I had a bit of a cold and gave my ticket to a mate thinking, well, I'll see him next time, won't I? But the other thing, that was they were supporting the Buzzcocks.
Right. Okay.
They weren't even headline material, kind of.
Yeah, people have seen bands I haven't seen, and that's the way it is. But the one band I would have liked to have seen were Joy. When Joy Division, when like friends of mine like Pete say, oh yeah, I saw Joy Division supporting Buzzcocks at West Runton. I'm just like, oh, that's sometimes why I wish I was a little bit older.
Tour,
yeah.
Well, you've mentioned something that I've heard much about, and it is the West Runton punk gigs.
Yeah,
and
incredible.
Well, partly, how did everyone get out there and get back?
Oh, you can sit in the pub and hear tales from various people about this. But yeah, people either got lifts or you got the train up there, and there was a little kind of, I think John T was telling me there was a kind of deserted or kind of derelict little house next to it. You could kind of bunk in, sleep in overnight, or you just huddle down and get back in the morning. Yeah, but there's lots of tales.
To my mind, coming from outside of Norwich and Norfolk, it just seems like a very unlikely place to have.
Mad. I don't quite understand. I don't know the history of why it was on the gig circuit, but it was on the gig circuit. People are a bit older than the punks.
I was going to say, for listeners who don't know Norwich and Norfolk, West Runton is a very small. I mean, it's not even a village, is it? It's on the Norfolk coast.
Yeah, it's a tiny little.
It's a cafe on the beach sort of thing, isn't it?
It's so bizarre that it became a thing. And before kind of punk, I mean, I met a chap who's a bit older who's like he was always talking about how he saw Hawkwind there in something like 74 and how wonderful that was. And then the punky generation will tell you about seeing Pistols and Joy Division and all that kind of stuff. It's an incredible bizarre thing.
Yeah. Well, there's probably a book in that somewhere. Not necessarily for you, or maybe somebody has written one.
I think I've done a kind of potted history of the gigs there and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it's I wonder if other bits of the country's had like regular gig venues that were in such hard to get places.
Yeah,
where you couldn't get home at the end of the night.
Yeah, no, I've not come across any. I mean, I'm not aware of any. That's not to say there aren't, but
that's bizarre.
Yeah, why there? Why not in Norwich itself?
Yeah.
But I guess that's the promoters are willing to pay the fees.
Yeah, and it had become part of the circuit. It was one of those, not just punk bands. You looked at who was on. It was a regular place for people to go.
Yeah. What will it say on your epitaph?
I don't know. I guess I've just been and I've gone. I guess.
Yeah.
Leave no trace. Lipstick traces on a cigarette.
Oh, yeah. There you go. That too. Do you have a favourite time of year in Norwich?
Spring, I think. Just when it's getting warmer, but it's not as hot as it's been now. And I also think Norwich looks fantastic the 2 weeks before Christmas.
Yes.
Everything's been to slow down a bit, all those lots going on, the lights in the city. Anyone who knows me knows I love Norwich, and all the people I work with at Reading are always laughing about how much I go on about Norwich. And I do think it's a great place. So yeah, so things like when you see it all lit up at Christmas, I just think it's pretty magic, really.
Well, it'd be a no-brainer if you're given the choice between living in Reading or Norwich. I don't think anyone would choose Reading over Norwich, would they?
Surely not. Apologies to anyone from there.
Yeah, nothing against what do you call Reading residents?
Readingites, I don't know.
Well, Norwich residents, actually.
Good old boys, I think.
Yeah. I think there is a term, I can't remember what it is. I'd read it when I came here, but it's a bit like Leeds. What people from Leeds? I can't remember what it is even that, but it's not a simple. You wouldn't guess it. It's not obvious. What's the most interesting thing that's ever happened to you in Norwich?
Actually, well, as I was walking up here to this, I passed the Whalebone pub and Danny Dyer was sitting outside it. So that's the most interesting thing that's happened to me.
You mean just casually having a pint, or was he?
Yeah, he's with a few people.
Oh, he's not making a.
No, I don't know. He's just
TV
there in a drink. It's like, there's Danny Dyer. What's he doing in Norwich? Yeah. More generally, what's the most interesting that's happened to me in Norwich? I don't know. One of the best days ever in Norwich, and apologies to Ipswich fans supporting, was the Milk Cup semi-final when we got to Wembley by Steve Bruce heading a goal in with a minute to go, and the roof came off Carrow Road, and that was just I'll always remember that.
Right.
One of the most exciting days of my life.
Does that top beating Bayern Munich? Was it 1993?
Yeah, 93. Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't have the money to go. It's one of my biggest regrets. I didn't borrow the money to go to that. So that would have been one of my. But I watched it on the telly and it's fantastic.
Oh no, I remember watching it on the telly. Would any Norwich fan at the time reasonably have expected them to win anyway?
I'm sure some did.
That's why I say reasonably expect them to win. Yeah,
it was great. I watched it in a pub in Kentish Town, and it was me and my friend Pete, who's from Norwich, and we were the only two people in the pub watching it on the telly. Right. We were like looking around. There was a few other people. It was an Irish bar, and just no one was interested in it at all. And we were like. We're trying to contain ourselves really of what we were watching, and kind of walking home almost not knowing what to do. There was nowhere to celebrate. It was a really weird thing. You knew something quite remarkable had happened, but you didn't know what to do about it.
I imagine if you were watching it at a Norwich pub, it would have been
it'd been chaos.
Yeah. Best kept Norwich secret other than Norwich itself.
Could be the King's Head. And I like that little garden by the Catholic Cathedral. The secret garden, or whatever it's called.
Oh, plantation garden.
Plantation garden.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that in the summer.
Yeah.
Oh, and Crusty Corner. That's a good Norwich secret.
Crusty Corner? Where's that? I don't know.
It's the corner of Bell Road. Do a Battenberg cake, which is remarkable.
Do they? Right. No, that's... No, I've not discovered that before now. If you were stranded on a desert island with one punk band, which one would you want it to be?
That's careful what you wish for, isn't it? I kind of... I immediately want to say, it's got to be the Sex Pistols, but they'd be horrible to be with, so probably not them. They'd probably be the Would it be Buzzcocks? I don't know. Maybe Vic Goddard from Subway Sect or something like that.
Yeah.
One of the odd bods.
Yeah.
I always thought kind of coming out of punk, that I've always kind of thought it must be great to be in a band like that, is the band like The Cure, who just seem to have created their own little world and live in it, and in a way that I always feel quite envious towards. They managed to create their own thing.
Yeah. In fact, mentioning The Cure reminded me of one thing I was going to comment on, because. Well, one thing, you couldn't get away with calling a record Killing an Arab today. The other one is Fat Lad Exam Failure by Bogshed, which I always loved it. And, most people knew a Fat Lad Exam Failure at the time. And I always thought, you could get away with calling a song that nowadays. And then I saw a couple of years ago they'd re-released the Bogshed EP that was on, yes.
It's a great song.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But, again, I don't know that I don't know how many people who like The Cure understand the genesis of the song "Killing an Arab."
Yeah, well, see, The Cure, because of it's the Camus thing, was why I got into The Cure, because they were another band who Robert Smith always name dropped books he was reading, and I used to go, all right, I'll read that. So it's through. I think I am right to say it was through that song "Killing an Arab" that I first read Camus. In my teenage existential years, and that book was really important to me. He also said somewhere that the kind of Road to Freedom trilogy by Sartre was one of his favourite books, so I read that. And he'd always just drop these names, so I always kind of like that about The Cure. I like Robert Smith's he just very much his own person. He was into all the kind of books and stuff, but he's also a QPR fan, wasn't he? And he liked that, and I like the fact that he could be these multiple versions of himself.
Oh, I didn't realise he was a QPR fan, actually. Yeah. Oh, I know a few QPR fans, but they never mentioned it to me. It's one of their... they were Norwich's celebrity fans.
Stephen Fry.
Yeah.
I think John Hurt might have been a Norwich fan.
Yeah.
The actor John Hurt. Obviously, you got old Delia. David Frost. He was a Norwich fan.
Was he? Yeah.
He was a Norwich fan.
Because I always remember the Delia Let's Avenue.
Yeah.
Because you were playing Man City.
Man City, yeah.
And you still lost.
Yeah. Although we got one back.
Well, I've been to see City a couple of times as an away fan. When I first arrived in Norwich, it was the year we won the title, the Tevez team, the first title we won. And I didn't see the last goal because I had to leave before the end. It was 5-1 when I left with 5 minutes ago. It was 6-1 in the end. But it was the one when Tevez, I don't know if you were there, Tevez had come back from an enforced break and he was playing golf, and his goal celebration, he ran over in front of the City fans and mimicked golf.
Yeah, no, I saw that one. Yeah.
I was going to ask you, well, I usually ask my guests what they're currently listening to. You conveniently post it on social media every day. What you're listening to.
I always just go in and think, listen to today, and grab a few things and kind of do it.
Is there any thought process behind that? Or, are you providing some service, for example, to your students who are...
No, it really. I just go think. I always pick 6 things when I'm working at home. 6 things I'm going to put on, and I tend to just look around the room and and just kind of grab quite randomly. Sometimes I think I'm really in the mood to listen to, I don't know, 60s R&B bands, and I'll grab a few of those. But often I just think I'll get some varied different things I'm going to listen to.
Yeah.
I like having some noise in the background when I'm working. Nothing too distracting, or I turn it down. But so I just kind of pick. But I kind of collected over the years lots and lots of music, so I've got a lot of it. I try not to get stuck in listening to the same thing. So I always what I like. Again, this is about having the object. When you got stuff saved on a cloud or whatever stream, and you forget about stuff. And I like it when I pick a record out and the one next to it, I think I haven't listened to that for years.
Yeah.
And I'll pick that out and have a listen to it.
But there's no curriculum behind it or anything like that. But because the other thing I'm going to say is, I think I'm not the only one who would say this. If I post something on social media that I'm currently listening to, hardly anybody pays any attention. You do get a lot of response to your daily.
I know. I don't know. Maybe it's just the circles I mix in.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think some of the people who respond to it, hopefully, it's just like, for me, it's like, do you remember this record?
Yeah.
Or here's something interesting or something like that. Because I like seeing interesting stuff. So it's just kind of sharing it in that way. But yeah, I've got a little kind of the people I'm friends with, I guess, on Facebook kind of like that kind of thing.
Are there any... Well, first of all, I'm assuming you listen to more than just punk and post-punk anyway, but are there... Well, we asked about Norwich bands, but I'm just interested about are there any contemporary punk bands that you listen to, or...
I like a band called Crown Court from London, who I think are really good. They're kind of like a kind of even harder version of the Ruts, really.
Right, yeah. No, I've not come across them.
Yeah, it's quite, they're quite oi-ish in their way.
Yeah, there's a few. I don't know if you've seen the Chisel. I've seen who are
no, someone's mentioned them to me. Yeah,
in a similar sort of vein. Do you go to Rebellion? I've got old friends who go to the. Go to Rebellion.
I went last year
because
because I had to do a thing about my book, and so I did go last year.
Yeah.
For it, I'm going up one day this year because I've got to do a Q&A with Steve Ignorant.
Right.
So I'm going to go up and do that. So yeah, it's funny. It's a really weird.
Well, I mean, because I've got friends of my age who you know go to relive their teenagers, but also I don't know if you take their kids along and stuff.
It's a really. I found it quite hard to get my head around, really.
Yeah.
And I saw Crown Court though; it was good. I saw a few things. I had good chats with people. I always duck out for a bit because I find it a bit much. But no, it's I mean, it's weird. I said to people I went with, I'm not sure if I'm loving this or finding this really odd. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Not sure really.
Oh yeah, I mean that's. I'm not saying I would be against going if somebody gave me a free ticket or if it was just down the road. But there are obviously some people who still like to live out the. I mean, one of my, he's a middle class professional, but every year he'll grow his hair into a Mohican to go to Rebellion.
Yeah, dress up for Rebellion. Yeah, it is what it. I mean, it's funny how punk's become that, in a way, but that's what happens to things. What happens to everything. It's like the Teds were doing it. In the 80s.
Well, something that I noticed in Norwich when I first came here, 10, 12 years ago. Which has sort of dissipated a bit, but it's Northern Soul. There used to be a lot of Northern.
Yeah.
What's that place on Oak Street? The Talk of the East that used to have a lot of Northern Soul events on and stuff. Yeah. Old punks will eventually die out, or as I hope, by the time I end up in an old people's care home, it's the Clash they'll be playing and not Vera.
That is. Find the penny has dropped that the people in care homes are not people who want to listen to 1940s music.
Yeah. Good. Right. Well, I tell you what. 7:20. Is
that all right?
Yeah. No, we'll draw it close there.